In the summer of 1999, the small town of Silver Creek, Colorado, was filled with the warmth of sunshine and the sound of teenagers enjoying their summer break. Among them were two young souls, full of dreams and excitement, Emily Carson and Jake Morales. Emily was 17, quiet and thoughtful, with a love for sketching nature and writing in her journal. Jake was 18, outgoing and kind, known for fixing bikes and helping neighbors with yard work. The two had been inseparable since middle school, and everyone in town knew them as the Mountain Kids because of how often they went hiking. Together, they loved the outdoors more than anything. While others spent weekends at malls or movie theaters, Emily and Jake explored trails, watched sunsets from hilltops, and camped under starry skies. They shared a special bond, not just as boyfriend and girlfriend, but as best friends who understood each other deeply. That summer, just a week after graduation, they planned one last hiking trip before Jake started a mechanic's apprenticeship and Emily began community college in the fall. Their plan was simple, a weekend getaway to the San Juan Mountains. It wasn't far from town, and they had been to that area before. But this time they wanted to take a different trail they had read about in an old hiker's book Jake found at a garage sale. The trail wasn't very popular, which made it more exciting to them. They packed supplies, food, and Jake's old film camera. Emily brought her journal and a small sketchbook. They told their families they'd be back Sunday evening. On Friday morning, Emily and Jake left in Jake's green Jeep Cherokee. Emily wore her favorite flannel shirt and Jake had his lucky backpack with patches from all the places they'd hiked. Their parents waved them off, a little nervous but used to their adventures. The last person to see them was a gas station attendant in Durango, who remembered them laughing as they bought trail mix, bottled water, and a map. When Sunday night came and the Jeep didn't return, both families started to worry. At first, they thought maybe the couple had decided to stay one more night. It wouldn't have been the first time. But when Monday morning came with no sign of them, the fear began to grow. Emily's mom called Jake's parents, and within an hour they contacted the local sheriff. The sheriff's office took the call seriously. Emily and Jake were responsible teens, and it wasn't like them to disappear without letting someone know. Within a day, a search and rescue team was put together. Dozens of volunteers, hikers, dogs, and helicopters were sent into the mountains. Trails were combed, rivers checked, and campgrounds searched. But there was nothing. No tire tracks, no campfire remains, no footprints. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The search went on for weeks. Flyers with their photos were posted all over town and in nearby cities. Local news stations covered the story, and friends from school helped organize hiking parties to look in areas the professionals had missed. Emily's parents kept answering the phone day and night, hoping for a tip or a sign. Jake's younger brother, Matt, only 13 at the time, stood by the window every evening, watching the driveway, in case his brother's Jeep suddenly pulled in. But the days turned to weeks and the hope started to fade. Summer ended, the leaves began to change, and still there was no sign of Emily or Jake. Eventually, the official search teams were called back, and the case was labeled unsolved. For the town of Silver Creek, it was a heavy moment. Everyone knew the couple. They had grown up in that town, walked those sidewalks, attended that school. It didn't feel real that they could just be gone. Despite the lack of answers, the families refused to give up. Emily's father returned to the mountains every weekend, walking different trails, calling her name. Jake's mother kept a notebook of every rumor or sighting that came in, no matter how small. There were even people who claimed to have seen them in other states, working at diners or traveling with a group. But none of those leads led anywhere. The Jeep was never found. Their bank accounts stayed untouched. Their phones remained off. Some people in town thought maybe the couple had run away to start a new life. Others believed something unexpected had happened in the wilderness, maybe a storm or an accident. But no one could say for sure. All they had were questions, and none of them had answers. Over time, the story turned into something like a legend. Newcomers to town would hear whispers about the lost couple of Silver Creek. Teenagers would tell stories around campfires, imagining where Emily and Jake might be. But for their families, it was no story. It was a missing piece of their hearts that had never returned. Emily's mom kept her daughter's room, just as it was, sketchbooks on the desk, a small photo of her and Jake taped to the mirror. Jake's father never sold the Jeep's parking spot, even though it stayed empty for years. Matt, now a teenager himself, promised that one day he would find out what happened. As the years passed, life moved on, but the memory of Emily and Jake stayed alive. Their story was remembered every June, when the town held a small candlelight walk in their honor. Friends lit lanterns and sent them into the sky, and while people smiled and laughed during those gatherings, there was always a quiet sadness in the air, the kind that comes when someone leaves without saying goodbye. No one could have imagined that it would take 20 years for the mountains to reveal their secret. But deep in the wild, quiet places that Emily and Jake once loved, something waited to be discovered, and when it finally was, everything the town thought it knew would change. Years began to pass, but the memory of Emily Carson and Jake Morales stayed alive in Silver Creek. What began as a rescue mission had slowly turned into a quiet sadness that settled over the town like a shadow. The search teams had gone home. The missing posters had faded. New students filled the school hallways where Emily and Jake once walked. Yet for those who loved them, time did not erase the pain. Emily's parents, Mark and Linda, never stopped hoping. Every birthday, every holiday, every summer, they left a place for her at the table. They couldn't bring themselves to move out of their house, afraid they might miss a phone call or a knock at the door. Emily's room remained untouched, filled with drawings, nature books, and photos of hikes with Jake. Jake's family tried to stay strong too. His mother, Teresa, would sit on the porch at sunset, staring toward the mountains. His father returned to work at the auto shop, but friends said he was never quite the same. Jake's younger brother, Matt, who was just a boy when his brother disappeared, grew up with one goal: to find out what really happened. As the years rolled on, people tried to help in their own ways. Local hikers kept an eye out. A few podcasts mentioned the case, and online groups shared possible clues. There were reports here and there, a backpack found near a river, a torn map on a hiking trail, but nothing that could be confirmed. Every time something was discovered, the families held their breath, only to feel that same deep sadness again when it turned out to be unrelated. Rumors also floated through town. Some believed that Emily and Jake had decided to run away together, leaving their old lives behind. Others thought they had gotten lost and couldn't find their way back. A few even said they had been caught in a sudden storm, or that they had fallen while hiking, but no theory ever came with real proof. The mountain had taken them, and for 2 decades it kept its silence. Matt, now a grown man, joined the sheriff's department. Everyone said he was one of the best young deputies they had seen, but he had another reason for putting on the uniform. Each day, he wanted to follow in the footsteps of the people who had once searched for his brother. He wanted to be close to the case, to study it, and one day solve it. Though the case was labeled cold, Matt kept a small box in his closet filled with articles, maps, and old notes. He read it every night like a puzzle he refused to give up on. Every once in a while, a stranger would come through Silver Creek asking about the story. Sometimes they were journalists, other times just curious travelers. They'd stop at the local diner where a faded photo of Emily and Jake still hung on the wall. Locals would tell them bits and pieces, how kind Emily was, how much Jake loved old cars, how in love the two were. But no one had answers, only memories. By 2019, it had been 20 years. Most people had stopped expecting news. Technology had changed, the town had changed, but the story of the missing couple stayed the same. Then something unexpected happened. A new resort had begun construction near the edge of the San Juan Mountains. The project was meant to bring jobs and tourists to the area, and many locals were excited. But for the families of Emily and Jake, it was difficult. The thought of large buildings and roads near the trails they loved felt like losing them all over again. One autumn morning, as part of the construction work, a crew was clearing thick brush near an old, unused road. The workers were preparing to build a new parking area for hikers. One of the workers, a man named Carlos, noticed something strange, a piece of metal sticking out from under the dirt and vines. At first, he thought it was an old fence post or a piece of farming equipment, but as the team began clearing the area, they uncovered more. Tires, a broken window, a steering wheel. It was a vehicle. Old, rusted, and almost completely hidden by trees and soil. It looked like it had been there for a very long time. As more of it was revealed, one of the workers stepped back and said softly, "It's a Jeep." The others paused, realizing what that might mean. Carlos called the foreman, who immediately stopped the work and contacted the local authorities. Within hours, police tapes surrounded the area. News of the discovery spread quickly through town. When Matt heard the radio call, his heart pounded. He rushed to the site, already fearing what he might find, but knowing deep down this could finally be it. The Jeep was covered in years of mud and moss, but its color could still be seen in patches. Faded green. The license plate, though rusted, was still readable. It matched the one that had been listed in the missing person report for Jake Morales' vehicle. The area where it was found wasn't far from the trailhead, but the terrain was tricky, full of drops, thick brush, and uneven ground. It was easy to see how the vehicle could have ended up hidden from view for so long, especially before the days of drone searches and satellite mapping. As the Jeep was carefully removed and examined, it became clear this was no random accident. Something important had finally been found. A door that had been closed for 2 decades was now opening. Questions that had hung in the air for years were about to be answered. People gathered near the site in quiet disbelief. Emily and Jake, and the 2 teenagers who had disappeared without a trace, had finally been found. And while it wasn't the return anyone had hoped for, it brought something the families had needed for so long, the beginning of the truth. What they would discover inside the Jeep would tell the final part of the story, a story that had waited in silence for 20 years. The discovery of the green Jeep Cherokee caused a wave of emotion across Silver Creek. After 20 years of waiting, wondering, and hoping, the truth was beginning to come to light. The construction crew had done something no search team or tracker could do. They had uncovered what had remained hidden for 2 long decades. Police and investigators quickly secured the area. They wanted to examine every detail carefully, not just to find out what happened, but also to treat the discovery with the respect it deserved. News of the find spread like wildfire. That evening, people gathered quietly near the site, though kept at a respectful distance. Many brought flowers. Some just stood in silence, lost in memories of the 2 teenagers who had been part of their town and hearts. Matt Morales, now a sheriff's deputy, stood by the Jeep with a heavy heart. He remembered that car so well. He used to ride in the back seat when Jake gave him lifts to school. It was strange to see it again, now covered in rust and earth, like it had become part of the mountain itself. But it was still there. The very same Jeep his brother had driven away in 20 years ago. Investigators worked slowly and with great care. Inside the Jeep, they found a backpack, a small first aid kit, 2 water bottles, and a camera case, the same one Jake had taken with him on every hike. It had protected an old film camera and a few rolls of undeveloped film. Surprisingly, the camera had been kept dry, and there was hope that the film might still hold pictures. Next to the passenger seat was Emily's sketchbook. Its pages were worn, but many drawings were still visible. One showed a wide mountain, view with trees below and a rising sun. Another showed 2 people sitting on a rock holding hands. Most of the pages were full of peaceful moments, lakes, pine trees, birds, a record of what she had seen and loved. The forensic team carefully collected the items and sent them for testing. A few days later, the county coroner confirmed what many had expected. The remains found inside the Jeep matched the DNA of Emily Carson and Jake Morales. Their families were notified in private, and though the news was heartbreaking, it also brought something they hadn't had before: certainty. For 20 years, no one had known what had happened. There had always been questions, doubts, and stories. Now, at last, there was a clear ending, one that, while sad, gave peace. Experts studied the area around the Jeep. The location where it was found was off a narrow path that looked more like an animal trail than a proper road. It was not marked on most maps. The earth nearby showed signs of a landslide, likely caused by rain years earlier. Investigators believed Jake had tried to drive on the narrow path, thinking it would lead back to a main road or a better view. But the path gave way, and the Jeep had slid down into a hidden ravine where it became trapped by trees and thick bushes. Because the area was steep and filled with natural cover, the Jeep remained out of sight from helicopters, hikers, and even trained dogs during the early searches. The mountains had quietly kept the Jeep hidden, wrapped in layers of time and earth. When word spread through town that the couple had finally been found, it brought a mix of emotions. People cried, hugged, and left messages at the trailhead. Candles were lit on front porches. The local school held a moment of silence during morning announcements. For a generation that had grown up hearing about Emily and Jake, it was a powerful moment, the closing of a story that had shaped their town. The most touching discovery came a few days later, when technicians developed the film from Jake's camera. Most of the pictures were taken during their final trip. They showed smiling faces, the inside of their tent, a pair of hiking boots next to a stream, and Emily making a silly face as Jake tried to take a picture. Each image was a window into their last days, peaceful, filled with nature, and full of love. One picture stood out the most. It was taken from inside the Jeep. Through the windshield, a narrow mountain trail could be seen stretching forward. Emily's hand was visible on the dashboard, holding the map they had taken. That image became the last photo in the album, the final snapshot of a journey that ended too soon. Emily and Jake's families decided to hold a joint memorial. The service was simple but beautiful, held outdoors near the trail they had loved so much. Friends, classmates, teachers, neighbors, and even strangers came to pay their respects. People shared stories of who Emily and Jake were, not just about their disappearance, but about how they lived. Someone read from Emily's journal, a short passage where she described how small she felt in the middle of the forest, and how peaceful that feeling was. Jake's younger brother Matt spoke about the years of wondering, and how he finally felt a kind of calm, knowing the truth. They were never lost to each other, he said. They were together, always. Honor of their memory, the town created a small lookout point near the area where the Jeep had been found. A wooden bench was placed there, along with a bronze plaque that read, "In memory of Emily and Jake, whose love for nature and for each other will never be forgotten." The lookout offered a beautiful view of the valley below, a place where people could sit, reflect, and remember. What the construction crew had found that day wasn't just a vehicle. It was the key to a story that had been locked away for far too long. And as the seasons changed once again, Silver Creek finally felt something it hadn't in 20 years. Peace. After the discovery of Emily and Jake's Jeep and the confirmation that the remains inside belonged to them, the town of Silver Creek slowly started to breathe again. The mystery that had lived in every conversation, every newspaper clipping, and every quiet moment had finally been solved. But even though the truth had come to light, there was still more to understand. One of the most important clues turned out to be Jake's old camera. Though it had been packed away in a plastic waterproof case and buried in a forgotten mountain trail for 20 years, the camera had survived the test of time. The film rolls were sent to a photo lab, where careful hands worked to develop the images without damaging them. When the photos were finally printed, they told a story more powerful than words. The first few pictures showed the start of the trip. There was a photo of Emily sitting on a log near their campsite, smiling with her hands wrapped around a mug of hot tea. Another showed Jake adjusting his backpack, making a silly face at the camera. Their expressions were filled with happiness and comfort. They weren't just two teenagers out for an adventure. They were best friends enjoying a peaceful moment away from the world. The next set of pictures showed the mountain trail, surrounded by tall trees and patches of sunlight. Emily had taken a photo of Jake standing on a large rock, arms stretched wide like he was flying. There was a photo of the trail sign, slightly tilted, with the name barely visible. One of the last pictures showed Emily's sketchbook lying on a blanket, open to a drawing of the valley below. But then came the most important image. It was the last photo on the roll. The picture showed the view from inside the Jeep. Through The windshield. You could see the edge of a narrow path lined with trees. The sunlight was fading and shadows had started to fall across the trail. On the dashboard was their folded trail map. Emily's hand was visible, lightly holding the corner of the page, pointing at something. It was a simple photo. No people, no words, no dramatic moment. But it held the answer to the question everyone had asked for years. Investigators studied the image closely. With help from maps, satellite views, and modern GPS, they were able to match the exact spot where the photo had been taken. It turned out that the couple had followed an old service road, possibly marked years ago for logging trucks but long since forgotten. The road had been washed out in several places, and near one of those broken areas, the Jeep had likely slid off the edge. Because the area was overgrown and hidden by trees, no one had spotted it during the search in 1999. The discovery gave peace, but also brought quiet sadness. Emily and Jake hadn't made a wrong decision. They had done what many hikers do. They followed a path they thought was safe. It was a simple accident, one that could happen to anyone. Knowing this helped the families heal. They no longer had to wonder if something else had happened. The pictures told the truth. A truth that was gentle, quiet, and full of love. Emily's drawings were also studied. In the sketchbook found in the Jeep, her last few pages showed calm scenes. Mountain ridges, pine trees, the flowing lines of a nearby river. Her pencil strokes were soft and thoughtful. There were no signs of fear or panic, only the beauty she saw around her. One final sketch showed two hands holding each other under a starry sky. That drawing was framed and placed at the memorial lookout, becoming a symbol of the bond the couple had shared. Jake's journal, which was tucked in the glove box, had only a few pages written during the trip. He wrote about how peaceful the mountains were, and how excited Emily had been to find a rare bird near their camp. His words were short and simple, but full of feeling. "It's quiet here," he wrote in one entry. "Just trees, sky, and us. Feels like time stopped and I don't want it to start again." The community reacted with a mixture of relief and reflection. Local schools invited safety experts to speak about hiking, nature travel, and emergency tips. The sheriff's department added updated trail maps and posted signs on older paths that were no longer safe. The town didn't want another story like Emily and Jake's, even though their story had now become one of love, nature, and remembrance. People began visiting the memorial site regularly. Some brought flowers, while others left smooth stones, painted with kind words or symbols of peace. School groups hiked to the lookout on field trips, learning about nature, respect, and the power of memory. For many, the story of Emily and Jake was no longer about two teenagers who vanished. It was about two souls who had loved deeply and lived fully, even if only for a short time. Their families found strength in the support of the community. They were no longer trapped in endless questions. Instead, they were surrounded by gentle answers. They spoke at local events, not about grief, but about the importance of holding on to each other, of exploring the world with care, and of always keeping the memories of loved ones alive. Matt, now a respected officer and a symbol of quiet determination in Silver Creek, said in a local interview, "My brother and Emily didn't disappear. They became a part of the mountain, of the place they loved most, and now they'll always be there, not lost but remembered. The mountain, once a place of mystery, became a place of peace. The trail they had walked, the view they had loved, and the story they had left behind would now live on, not just in old photos or sketches, but in the hearts of everyone who heard it." And though time would keep moving, Emily and Jake's story would always be part of Silver Creek, a quiet reminder that love, nature, and memory are some of the strongest things in the world. The story of Emily Carson and Jake Morales had touched the hearts of thousands. After 20 years of mystery, the discovery of their Jeep and the items inside had finally given the answers that so many had waited for. But more than just a case solved, it became a story that reminded people of love, friendship, and the beauty of memory. The town of Silver Creek changed after the discovery. For years, people had spoken about Emily and Jake in quiet tones, always with questions in their voices. Now those questions had been replaced by calm stories and warm memories. People no longer said whatever happened to them. Instead, they said they were here and they mattered. The memorial lookout became a place where people often went, not just to remember Emily and Jake, but to find peace. It was located just a short walk from the trailhead, near where the Jeep had been found. The path to the memorial was made safe, with signs and benches along the way. The final stop opened to a beautiful view of the valley, tall pine trees, rolling hills, and the soft whisper of wind in the leaves. Visitors came from near and far. Some brought flowers, others left handwritten notes tucked under rocks. A few families brought their children and told them the story, not as a sad tale, but as a lesson in love and the importance of being prepared and respectful when exploring nature. One visitor, a woman from another town, left a small wooden box at the lookout. Inside it were folded paper cranes, each with a message of hope and kindness written on its wings. Another visitor painted a rock with stars and wrote, "For the two who found the sky together." Matt Morales visited the lookout often. He didn't always say much when he was there. Sometimes he would just sit on the bench, close his eyes and listen to the wind. Other times, he'd walk around the trail, checking the signs and making sure the area stayed clean. He had promised himself long ago that he would find out what happened to his brother. Now that he had, he wanted to protect the place where Jake's story ended, and where it truly began for so many others. The town also held a special event each year in honor of Emily and Jake. It was called the Lantern Walk. Every June, on the weekend closest to the date they had gone missing, people would gather at the trailhead in the evening. As the sun began to set, they lit lanterns, some made of paper, others made of glass, and walked quietly along the trail to the lookout. At the memorial, people would take turns sharing memories, poems, or thoughts. The lanterns were then set gently on the ground or hung in trees. The glow from the lights created a soft, magical scene in the quiet darkness. For a moment, it felt like Emily and Jake were right there, not as a mystery, but as part of the light. Over time, their story was written about in books, featured in documentaries, and shared in classrooms. But the people of Silver Creek never allowed the story to be turned into something dramatic or sad. They kept it true. They told it the way it really was. A story about two young people who loved nature, who loved each other, and who had left behind more than anyone ever expected. Emily's drawings and poems were collected into a small book, which her parents published with the help of a local artist. The book was called In the Trees and the Sky. Inside were pages of her art, her thoughts, and her love for the world around her. Jake's family helped create a hiking safety program where high school students learned about safe trails, how to read maps, and how to prepare before going into the wild. It became part of the school's outdoor education class. The two families, once separated by years of pain and questions, became close. They often spent time together, sharing memories, working on the memorial, or simply sitting in silence. They had lost something precious, but they had also gained strength and healing through each other. People often said that Emily and Jake had taught them something, not just through what had happened, but through the way they lived. They reminded others to enjoy the little things, the sound of leaves underfoot, the sparkle of a river, the feeling of someone's hand in yours. They reminded people to slow down, look up, and be grateful. Even the mountain, which had once held the secret of their disappearance, became a place of comfort. It had taken two young souls, but in the end, it gave something back: understanding, peace, and a story that would live on in the hearts of many. One cloudy morning, Matt visited the lookout once again. It had been exactly 1 year since the Jeep was found. He stood by the bench looking out at the valley. The wind moved gently through the trees and birds sang softly in the distance. He pulled out a small photo of Jake and Emily, taken during one of their earlier hikes, and placed it in the wooden box beneath the bench. Then he whispered, "You're not just a story. You were real. You still are." As he turned to leave, a group of school children passed by with their teacher. One of the kids asked, "Who were they?" The teacher smiled and said, Two people who loved each other, loved nature, and showed us how important it is to never stop caring. And just like that, their story continued, not as a mystery, but as a memory that would live on forever.